Hey, everybody, welcome back into another edition of the DoctorBicuspid.com podcast. I'm excited you've joined us today, and I'm excited to have back on dear friend and HR guru out there, and that is Alan Twigg with Ben Erickson and Associates. Alan, what is going on, my friend?
Life is good as always, Mr. Kevin. Everything is good. I'm happy to be back and happy to talk once again about HR, which is my favorite topic. I know it's not everyone's, but if you got employees, it's kind of important. So, there you go.
Maybe I'm biased, but the way that you've presented it in this series has been fantastic because it's short, it's action packed. Every episode has been great. This is sadly the sixth of our 6-part series. We're going to put links to the previous 5 in the show notes or in this article on Dr. Bicuspid because Alan has covered so much in this look at the employee life cycle. And I know for the big finale, my friend, you've got a lot to get to, so I'm going to get out of your way and let you lead the way.
Yeah, so this whole series has been the employee life cycle, right? And so, we started with culture and leadership. We went into hiring, we went into life circumstances. And so we're kind of at more or less the end of the life cycle here. So kind of, resignation, termination, retirement, that kind of a thing. Now, in the world of HR, resignation and retirement are both pretty straightforward. There's not a whole lot of compliance nuance there. So a lot of today is focused on termination. And yeah, I'm going to pack in a lot here. So folks, may want to listen to this a couple times or may want to take some notes if you're not driving or something. So yeah, let's dive into it. So we're going to start with performance management, and which is really just about, communicating performance expectations, managing issues and all of that. And when you say performance management, a lot of people think of performance reviews, right? How do we do a performance review? Do I have to do them annually? Is it quarterly? That kind of thing. Now, thankfully, the classic annual performance review has been dying a slow death for a long time. Most people have found it to just be ineffective. And especially in a small dental practice, what often tends to happen is the practice leaders, because you're working so close chairside with these people all day, every day, when the time comes to give feedback, a lot of times it gets sugar coated or the negative stuff kind of gets swept under the rug a bit. And what happens then is the performance review is not nearly as effective at fixing things. And it's also not really all that effective at protecting the practice. Because sometimes people think, well, if I need to fire someone, then I can rely on these performance reviews that showed that they weren't very good. But again, if you're sugarcoating the performance reviews, then it doesn't really help you. And in some cases, it can actually backfire and help a former employee that might be suing you. Because if there's discovery and they get those performance reviews, the performance review says, oh, Kevin was a really good employee. Why would you fire him? So that being said, you still need to communicate to employees how they're doing, what's working, what's not working. So the bottom line with this that I always say is whatever works, works. So there's no rule that says you have to do it annually or you have to do it every 6 months. You can do these however you want. Some people just do informal one-on-one check-ins. For some people, it's done with an email summary. It can be documented. It can be not documented. There's no rule with this. And so really it's just whatever works, works. Meaning, does it work for you in terms of your time, schedule, communicating and all of that? And does it work for the employees? Do they feel like they know where they stand? The worst thing is for an employee to be walking around the office going, gee, some days I think I'm doing a good job and other days I don't know if they're going to fire me. That's not what we want. There's also a difference between someone that you just hired 6 months ago and someone who's been with the practice for 20 years. Someone who's been with the office for 20 years, assuming they're still good and you're happy with them, you don't need to do a formal sit-down performance review every single year. You can, be a little bit more informal than that. So that's kind of performance reviews there. And just the main thing is just make sure that you're not sugarcoating those and kind of making it seem like someone's amazing when maybe they're not. Now, another big piece with performance management is this whole idea of tolerating a bad employee, because every office at some point goes through this where there's someone who is either mediocre or they're just downright straight up toxic and they bring everybody else down. They're an energy vampire. They're the kind of person that when you see their car pull up in the parking lot, you get this feeling of dread. Obviously that's a bad thing. And what I would really encourage folks to do is think about this on a numbers basis, because At most practices, the vast majority of the employees are good employees. They are not toxic, they're not bad. And if your practice has more bad employees than good employees, that's a separate issue. We'll talk about that offline. But the worst possible thing you can do if you have one of these toxic employees is let them basically get away with it, because what it does is it kills the motivation and the productivity and the employee engagement of your good employees, because now they go, well, why should I show up on time? Why should I do a good job? But they let Kevin get away with everything. So the key thing there is just taking action. And I know that we put off taking action because we're in a tight labor market and we don't want to be short staffed. And, what if we confront this person, they get mad and they quit and all of that. I will say that I have heard this over and over and over again, that good employees and good teams, they will happily work short staffed if it means that they don't have to work with this toxic person. Someone that is truly that bad, that is bad enough that people will quit because they don't want to work with this person, or they'll quit because they don't want to work for a practice that tolerates someone who gets away with that. That is kind of the worst case scenario, is that your good employees steadily quit and leave, and now you're stuck with basically just bad employees. So just keep that in mind. It's obviously one of the hardest things you have to do as a leader, is make that decision, and for the good of the practice and so on, it's often necessary. Now, when it comes to giving feedback and correcting, there's a number of things with this. And I'll kind of boil this down as minimally as I can. And this is a big topic, but in short, simple things, one of the rules with this is you've got to give objective feedback. So in our heads, we often will tell a story. So we'll say, okay, Kevin keeps showing up late. That means Kevin's not dedicated to the job, or Kevin doesn't care about our patients. Kevin doesn't care about the practice. Well, that's the story. The objective thing is that Kevin has been late X number of times over the past month. Another example might be that someone is rolling their eyes in team meetings, or they're slamming cabinet doors, or when you try to talk to them, they just walk away from you. That's objective behavior. The story, we would say, is this is a mean person. This person doesn't care about anyone but themselves. So anytime you're giving any sort of feedback, make sure that you are always objective, because if you bring in those subjective stories, it'll derail the conversation. And now the employee will say, well, hold on. What are you saying? I'm not dedicated to this job. Of course I'm dedicated. I just have these circumstances, and so now we're talking about dedication. We're not talking about tardiness. So that's one of the golden rules, is keep it objective. And then there's a couple frameworks to share. So one is a good friend and colleague of ours, Catherine Eitel Belt. She has a wonderful framework that she has a upcoming book coming out about this, but it's a wonderful framework around how to have these difficult conversations in a way where everyone comes away from the conversation better, happier, and we can move forward. She often talks about how we always fall into this trap of thinking we either have to confront the person and they're going to quit, or we don't confront them. And those are like the only two options. And Catherine says, no. There's a way that we can do this and have it be a good, productive conversation. So I would encourage folks to look up Catherine's info and her work on that. One simple model that we have is called the 5-step productive feedback model. And I'll go through this real quickly because it's real simple and real intuitive. So the first piece with any sort of performance issue is, what is the rule or the policy or the standard? So, at our practice, we want employees to be showing up on time on a regular basis, or we want our patients to feel cared for and healthy and happy, whatever those objective policy standards are. Then there is the objective thing that this person is doing. So they're showing up late this many times, or they're, not, filing the insurance claims properly, whatever it is. What is objectively their issue? There's obviously then therefore a gap between whatever the expectation is and what this person is actually doing. The fourth step is the most important one, and this one's often missed. This is where you are communicating to the employee the impact that their behavior is having on the practice, on the patients, on the rest of the team, whatever that might be. And it's, saying, okay, Kevin, when you show up late, what you're doing is you're putting stress on the rest of the team. It means that we have to adjust patient schedules. There's a hit to production. It's like, what is the impact? That's really important. And then the last step is basically getting a commitment from the employee about, this is our standard, you need to do this, da 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 da, and getting a commitment from them. So that sounds kind of formal, but really those 5 steps can all sort of be collapsed into 2 or 3 sentences, really, and it's pretty easy to flow. But the key thing is you just want to have all 5 of those hit in your statement that you make. And I will also say too that it's so important to address performance issues as early as you possibly can. We always get these calls from people where they say, "Oh, I got this employee and I think I need to let her go because she hasn't been performing very well." And we say, "Well, how long has this been going on?" "Oh, about 2 years." "Okay, have you talked to her about this?" "No, I haven't talked to her." It's like, okay, we gotta we gotta talk to people sooner than that. So if you address this stuff early on, especially with a new hire, often you can just have a couple conversations of, "Hey, I know maybe your last practice, you guys did it this way. Just so you know, at our practice, we want you to do it this way." And you do that stuff early on, it's fine. No one's going to freak out and start crying and quit. But if you let stuff drag out for 3 years and then you talk to them about it and they're like, "Wait a minute, you're saying I've been doing this wrong for 3 years and now you're talking to me about," that's when we have a problem. All right. So let's talk a little bit about kind of disciplinary action and termination. This will be kind of the last big chunk to this. So as everyone kind of knows, when you go to HR school, 101 HR school, you learn about this idea of, you start with a verbal warning, then you go to a written warning, then maybe there's something like suspension, another written warning, and termination. There's kind of this progression with that. Obviously, sometimes you need to skip those steps. I mean, if one employee goes up to another employee and just punches her in the face, we're not going to give a verbal warning. And then the next time it happens, we give a no, we're going to skip right to probably termination in that case. The key thing is you don't want to lock yourself in. So if you have an employee handbook that talks about this, really important little detail that sometimes gets missed is people will say, "We will always follow this process. We will always start with a verbal warning and always then go to written." That binds your hands. And now, again, if someone punches an employee, now you basically can't fire them right away because you have to follow this thing that you've laid out. So just make sure that if you have language about that, that's fine. It's normal to do those steps in most cases. Just make sure you're not tying your hands and making it rigid. Now, the biggest mistake that employers make when they fire an employee is they do it with absolutely no documentation. And oftentimes people do this because they have this myth in their heads. And we've got, Kevin, we have to bust a myth, okay? We all have to help everyone understand. The myth is people think I'm in an at-will state, therefore I can fire someone whenever I want, with or without notice, with or without cause, and nothing bad will ever happen. Now, it is true that every state except for Montana is an at-will state, and it is true that under at-will you can fire people with or without notice, with or without cause, etc. Here's the issue with that. The part that is not true is the last part that says nothing bad will ever happen. Because the reality is there are what are called protected classes. And these are those things that many people are familiar with: race, religion, color, age, national origin, pregnancy, etc. Now, protected classes vary massively from state to state. So there are federal ones that are covered under Title VII, and those are pretty straightforward. But at the state level, and depending on how many employees you have, there are a bazillion different ones. So you have to understand your particular state ones, again, based on your employee threshold. Some may apply, some may not apply. And really what this protects you against is a claim, or what I call basically a scary letter. So you get a scary letter from an attorney that says you fired Kevin, and Kevin is, in all these protected classes, and therefore we're going to sue you because you're a terrible employer. What those scary letters are after is just a quick settlement, basically, is to scare you into a settlement. Those settlements can be anywhere from $5,000 up to $100,000, depending on the severity of what it is and all of that. But here's the thing. I have heard from many lawyers who work with ex-employees, and what those lawyers have said is that if the employer has documentation, has their ducks in a row, they do not take the case, because these lawyers are not stupid. They're not going to go up against an employer in some sort of lawsuit when it's clearly a losing case. And what that means, ducks in a row, is that you have a policy manual that the employee signed off on. You have a job description that the employee signed off on. You have potentially documentation of verbal warnings, documentation of written warnings. You have maybe good performance reviews where you documented these deficiencies. And basically it clearly proves that this was performance related. This was not because this person was old or they were a minority or whatever it is. So that is really important. So there are lots of rules about termination that come into play, and we don't have time to get into all of them here. I mean, there's documentation, there's what to say, what not to say. There are a number of state rules about final paychecks and when the final paycheck is due, how it needs to be paid. It varies based on whether you're firing the person or they're resigning. In some states, there are now documents related to unemployment that you have to give the employee at the end of employment. There's obviously the payout of vacation and PTO. So there's a lot of complexity to termination. And so the thing I would just say is be very careful. So termination obviously carries all sorts of risks. There's all sorts of emotions to it. And really, one of the things that I think employers can do that is beneficial as a practice standpoint is controlling the conversation, because one of the things that derails these conversations a lot is the employee will deflect. They will say, well, this isn't my fault. This is so-and-so's fault. Or they'll distract and they say, well, why are you talking to me about this? I mean, Kevin does this all the time. And so now they're trying to deflect the conversation so that we talk about somebody else instead of them. Sometimes people just go silent and they kind of stonewall. Sometimes they start crying. And so it's all of those things. Those are things that you can practice on. Practice with your spouse. I mean, there's games that we do in some of our trainings where we have the person who's playing the role of the employee decide in their head which of those kind of tactics they're going to do. And then the person playing the leader has to say, okay, I'm sorry, today's your last day. We have to let you go because of things that we've talked about. And the person then does this thing and they have to practice controlling the conversation and bringing it back around to that. In one of the trainings we did, one of the people that was playing the employee said, well, but Shelley said that you have ugly shoes. It's like, that was her way of derailing the conversation. And the person playing the leader was like, okay, what do I do with this? Ugly shoes. I don't have ugly shoes, do I? So yeah, and a little plug, we talked about this previously. We do have our 2-day training courses. We call them People Power, where we do exercises like this. We talk about termination and everything. So in terms of some final thoughts, so I would just have folks think about, if you're a dentist, it's like, how confident were you the very first time you held a drill or you set a crown? Your practice leader, again, how confident were you the first time that you reviewed a P&L? Or again, these are things that get better with time and they get better with practice. Now, the challenge with HR and certainly with terminations is we're not going to do 5 terminations every single day. If we are, then we've got a serious problem. And so it's totally understandable to feel apprehensive or not feel confident about terminating people or having these difficult conversations. One of the things that you can do that kind of, I think, helps is if you can confidently say that you as the leader did everything you could to help this employee get better or meet the expectations, then you can absolutely feel justified if you do need to let this person go. It doesn't mean that it's fun, doesn't mean that it's, what you want to be doing with your time, but just, you want to be able to go into these conversations saying, okay, I gave Shelley every opportunity to do better and she did not improve. So it's like, okay, this is definitely on Shelley. And then it's just a matter of, checking in with someone like us or someone about, okay, do I have all my documentation straight, ducks in a row? What are my compliance risks, et cetera? Talk through the process, and then it's pretty straightforward from there. So I know that was a lot. And I know that this stuff is emotional and it's challenging. And again, it's just once you get a sense of the requirements, the documentation, it's very straightforward and it's just a matter of going through it. So again, not something that any of us want to do. And there's all the things that we talked about in the other parts around, hiring the right people the first time so we don't end up in this position, or doing all the appreciation engagement stuff to encourage people to not resign. So closing this out, I just think, HR is HR is a system, and I think having the right system in place, just like all the other practice systems, it just makes your life a lot easier.
Well, you said something at the very start about that this may be something that people want to listen to a couple of times to really get all the points that you mentioned, because that was meat packed right there, my friend. It absolutely was. And I appreciate it. And I know you mentioned the 2-day conference that Ben Erickson and Associates hosts, but I know there's so many other resources that you all have, including the Dental HR podcast, where you talk about this on a lot of episodes.
Yeah, definitely. The podcast, we've done a lot of episodes about, those scary letters or about other things and how to protect the practice. We talk about a whole variety of just different HR topics, and they're real short, bite size, good little nuggets of things there. And then yeah, we also have something that we call the HR director package, and this is our main thing that we do with clients. And it's basically a package of kind of these elements that we've talked about over the course of this series around having a really good policy manual in place, job descriptions, all the documentation, the forms that you need over the whole employee life cycle. We also keep everything up to date. So anytime there's changes in your state laws or federal laws, we keep it up to date automatically. And then we also have unlimited phone and email support with our HR specialists. So talking through a termination, a pregnancy, any sort of crazy conversations or difficult things that you need, you can give us a call. We could talk through it. So yeah, again, I mean, there's no training on this stuff. A lot of practice leaders struggle with HR, and there's just an element of investing a little bit in your knowledge and training, and then having resources that you can call upon when things get tricky.
Well, and Alan is a fantastic resource, as are all the people at Ben Erickson Associates. I've been blessed to know them for a long time, and Dr. Bicuspid has been working with Ben Erickson and Associates on HR content for a number of years, and I appreciate that as well as all the work you put in on this 6-part series that I think's really been a game changer for some practices out there, Alan. So I really appreciate it, my friend.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. Always happy to help, and this is who we are over here at Ben Erickson. Is we're just a group of individuals who like to help folks and make HR less of a stress. So
Well,
happy to help as always.
we're going to put the link to Ben Erickson and Associates in the show notes, as well as on drbicuspid.com. If you're reading this article, it's in the article. Also, as I mentioned, this is the 6th in a 6-part series. So the other 5, all meat packed as well. Definitely going to be links as well for you to go back and listen to this various points of the employee life cycle that Alan went through as we were discussing. So again, thanks, my friend, and I look forward to seeing you down the road.
Yep, sounds good. Thanks again, Kevin.
Absolutely. Thanks to all of you for listening to this episode of the drbicuspid.com podcast. It's been a great series. I can't wait to see how this changes how you handle HR in your practice. And again, make sure if you've got questions, you reach out to the experts at Ben Erickson and Associates. Till next time, Kevin Henry, editor-in-chief for Dr. Bicuspid, signing off. And as always, wishing you nothing but success ahead.